Have you connected? Are you going to connect to via HDMI? Or
Yeah,
network?
HDMI.
Okay.
Yeah, so here's the
Or when you need it.
Whenever. Have you just charged?
Direct to the restroom.
Said about 5 minutes.
You can go for about 5-10 minutes. It'll probably be more like 15 or 20. Yeah.
what are you doing in Austin, Texas?
In the dream. What about you?
Well, for now, I am retired. I wasn't working out, so about a month I get to start.
I tried that too. Retired for a while.
Right.
It wasn't a good idea.
Well, I actually liked it, it's just the money wasn't there.
That's the problem. Spend it faster than I can bring it.
I know. I cut back spinning and did all this. Cutting back spinning is a tough thing.
Unless you don't have a choice.
Right. Even then, it's tough.
No, yeah, I'm a software developer.
Right.
Looking for the next thing.
Aha. What, have you been like web for a long time? Or
No, I haven't been web for a long time. I've been heading into it here for the last several years. Closer and closer.
Did 3D graphics since the 80s. And drivers for 3D chips and stuff like that. I was getting tired of it. Switched to web stuff. We've seen some more creative and interesting.
It's a hot area now.
Right. It's a website with an app. And trying to switch in that area, but if you don't have like background and connections, people just want from the inside, then it'll be hard to fit your way.
Break in. What'd you do your web app?
I didn't use any toolkits or platforms. I just did straight HTML. And it's leveraged on top of Google Maps. So Google Maps does all the heavy lifting. And my thing, force a car lane. And anyway, it's for people that like that you compare sizes of things from different parts of the world. Some people think it's really cool. I can tell by usage patterns that folks from all over the world that use it. And I get a few letters every day from folks saying they like it, thanks a lot, please add this feature. It's always a good sign if somebody's asking for more features.
It's cool. Get users, you know.
Right. The thing is, it's not the sort of thing that's going to make much money. It doesn't have a ton of traffic, and it sort of doesn't have real action and clicks.
This was a real simple version of a Jeopardy game.
Oh, hello.
That you, as a user, you sign in and create all the questions and answers. And then you can mail out to whoever teachers.
Oh,
Grade school teachers pick it up. Using that fee, guys asking $7.50 for every dictionary. Simple little web app.
that sounds great. Well, I
Sell one of those a year, you know.
I know, I wish.
Pretty good.
Well, when I was hoping, putting some ads, I was hoping I'd start getting some serious money, but it's just like not enough people around the world are enough interested to make it all work out. And so, I mean, I like, I sort of made it for myself because do some stuff with maps I always wanted to do just on my own. Admittedly, a few folks around the world that like this,
I'll check it out. I'm really curious about that.
I'm just on the board of this group called Technology Advisory Group. And we just, it's a better option to be. We have speakers. We used to be downtown. It's a morning group, so it's a kind of a strange kind of shape. People can do it at 7 o'clock in the morning.
All right, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. If you're still back there getting food or whatever, you guys can hear me, right? So continue doing what you're doing. It's fine. I just wanted to get started so we don't go too late. My name is Brian Mosque. Thanks for coming out to Bleeding Edge Web. How many people are out for the first time this evening? Okay, a fair number. Cool. Well, thanks for coming out. This is some information that you might find useful if this is your first time, so you can follow us on Twitter. The slides are available. My slides are available online at that URL if you want to follow along, or in the future if you want to follow along remotely. We do also live stream, Capital Factory live streams for us. The info is in the meetup. And if you're interested in joining our Slack group, that's the URL at the bottom. And again, all these slides are hosted online, so if you don't catch a URL or whatever, you can always grab it later. So first, some announcements. If you parked in the building, don't forget to pick up a little parking validation card from the guy at the front desk there. It's a little bit expensive if you forget that at the end of the night. I've made that mistake before. And then also, we like to, after the meetup, generally walk a block over to Buffalo Billiards on 6th Street, and whoever's interested can have a beer and sort of socialize and do whatever. So I know a few of us usually do that. And then we also do announcements, so if anyone here is hiring, or if you're looking for work, anything like that, we sort of have open forum for that right now. Does anyone have anything? Announcement-wise? No? Okay. And if you think of something later, you know there's time later to bring it up. So I don't need this. All right, so if you're new to the meetup, We generally do the first 15 or 20 minutes, either myself or Corey over here is my co-organizer. We do what we call News from the Bleeding Edge, so it's our Bleeding Edge web segment. We talk about the latest and greatest in browsers, frameworks, just kind of whatever's interesting going on within our space, as I think probably a lot of us here are sort of front-end web application developers. And then our main talk for this month is Web Performance Deep Dive with Chander Dhall, who's in the back there. So we'll get to that in a minute. But first, thank you to our sponsors. So Capital Factory has been giving us this space for several years now. We really appreciate that. Thank you, Capital Factory. And this month, our pizza and beer and everything is provided by Tech Systems. So we have a couple of people here from Tech Systems. You guys want to come up and say something?
Hey, how are y'all doing? So, my name is Nick Strong. I'm an account manager with Tech Systems here in Austin. That's my partner, Salma Segovia, that's sitting right there. So I lead our tech digital practice, which basically focuses on all things front-end web development related. We have 110 offices nationwide, but our representation here in Austin. We partner with Under Armour Connected Fitness, Whole Foods, Amazon, to name a couple, General Motors, Sun Power, and Express Scripts. We see a lot of different positions, React related, Node related, Angular related. So if you have any questions about what's going on in the market, who's hiring, if you want access to some of those customers, please do come and talk to us, and we're happy to help you out. Cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Thanks for the pizza.
My pleasure.
And if you're in the back there, if you're just coming in, there is space up closer to the front, and there's also plenty of space over here on the side, and there's a screen on the wall here. So feel free to make yourself at home. All right, let's jump right into it. So first, we have a browser update. Last time we spoke, whoever was here last month, these were the browser versions that were current at the time. And this is what's changed. Notably, you'll notice that Edge actually changed. We don't normally see that. The last time that happened was about 6 months ago. Chrome 58, so there's a link to the release notes if you want all the details. Just to call out a few of the more interesting things, they added full support for IndexedDB 2.0. If you're not familiar with IndexedDB, it's pretty cool. It's like a full-blown database inside the browser, so it gives you access to all these kinds of things that you would expect in something a little more sophisticated than like local storage. So if you have need for that kind of stuff, if you're not familiar with it, you should learn more about it. I think 2 or 3 of the major browsers now support that. And just as a teaser, I threw it on this slide at the bottom. Headless Chrome was announced. So it's not in this version. I think it's been announced as being available in the next version behind a feature flag. But that's big news, actually, if you're familiar with like Phantom.js, for example. I think just today or yesterday, the official maintainer of Phantom.js announced that he will no longer be maintaining Phantom.js, largely because of that news. So we'll have more to say about that later, but I just wanted to throw that out there because it has been mentioned publicly. They also are supporting full screen PWAs, progressive web apps, so it's not as interesting because it's Android specific, but that's definitely something, again, if you haven't heard of PWA, that acronym, you'll probably be hearing more about it as more browsers start adopting that standard. It's very important for making an immersive experience on mobile in a standard web application. So Firefox, characteristically, if you look at their release notes, have tons of stuff. They release all kinds of specific little features and fixes. But this month, it wasn't anything super major. So I just picked out a few of the sort of more interesting specific things. For example, CSS caret color. So that's literally the caret, like the little blinking thing at the point where you're typing. You can set the color of that in CSS, which for whatever reason, I was not aware of that actually. So I just thought that was interesting. There's also a property called display flow root. So you're probably familiar in CSS with like display none, display block. So there's a new one called flow root, and it basically replaces what we've had to do for 30 years now is, like clear fix type things. When you have floated elements on the page, getting them to sort of clear each other in a way that makes the layout do what you want. Well, now there's actually a built-in way of doing that in CSS. And finally, you may or may not be familiar with the C:\fake path thing, which has been around forever in other browsers. And basically, when you have a file upload input field, as a security precaution, the field itself doesn't provide you with like the full absolute path on the file system to the file, because that would sort of tell you about that person's system. And so a long time ago, obviously on Windows, someone decided to just return it always as fake path. And that's been around for probably 20 years. Interestingly, Firefox added that kind of out of nowhere. And I linked to it just because I thought it was sort of interesting. When you go look at the discussion, it's like these guys at Mozilla going, hey, you know, what about this fake path thing? I don't know, whatever. It's kind of stupid, but everyone else does it. So they just added it. So it's like kind of random. Edge 15, the Edge version numbering is very confusing. The long number you see is like the build number. The reason it's confusing is because Edge releases are tied to Windows releases. So even though Edge actually iterates on a pretty good schedule nowadays, sort of on a similar schedule to Chrome and Firefox, but the wide public doesn't see those iterations until Windows updates, and then a new version of Edge shows up with that. And so the last time that happened with Edge 14 was about 6 months ago. And then finally, they just pushed out Edge 15 widely with the Windows 10 Creator update. So I'm not going to go through everything because it's basically a roll-up of like a lot of stuff we've been talking about over the past 6 months. But it is actually a really huge release. And if you're not familiar with it, you should go check it out. Is there a question?
How did Microsoft Internet Explorer, which used to be the dominant browser, now get down to almost nobody using it?
How did it happen?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like Chrome and Firefox completely dominate now, if I understood you correctly.
That's a much bigger discussion that I'd love to have over beer afterwards. Maybe not right this moment. But yeah, there's a lot to that. Safari 10.1. So Safari 10.1, we announced it back in like January or February when it actually technically was released, but it wasn't released super widely at that time. It was kind of released in preview. So we actually spent a lot of time talking about it a couple of months ago. I'm not going to do that today. This is just a reminder that at the end of last month, it actually went widely released, so everyone kind of got the update. This was a really critical release, though, because from 10.0 to 10.1, they added all this stuff that was really important to bring it up to kind of feature parity with the other major browsers. So again, if you're not familiar with that one, go check out the release notes. Now, speaking of browsers, pop quiz. We talk a lot about sort of the four that I just talked about. Who thinks they can guess the top 5 browsers, but let me back up. The ones we talk about, generally we focus on US, and generally speaking, focus on desktop, just because we have to focus on something for the meetup. But who thinks they can name the top 5 browsers worldwide across all platforms? Or even the top 3? Anyone? What do you think the most popular one is?
Firefox?
Internet Explorer.
Something in China.
Huffin.
So these are the top 5 by percent. You notice anything kind of weird? Who knows what that is? Anyone? Raise your hand if you know what browser that is.
Is it called QA?
2 people. QA.
Huffin?
Squirrel?
So 9%,
UC.
almost 1 out of 10 human beings who use a web browser on planet Earth use a browser called UC browser. It's in Asia. It's owned by Alibaba. It's been around for 13 years now. None of us have heard of it, including me. I'm not smarter than you. I just heard about it a couple of days ago when I was looking at this. And when you reduce it, this started out life as a mobile-only browser. So when you restrict it to mobile-only statistics, it actually goes to 17%. So almost 1 in 5. Pretty amazing that no one in this room has heard of it, right? You may or may not care about that. Like if you don't support Asia, you probably don't. But it's very interesting. There's a link here to learn more about this. There's a blog post where someone went into a lot more detail about different browsers and so forth. But the key takeaway, if we didn't already know, is know your audience. So if you're catering for US only, you're probably fine. But if you're doing anything sort of supporting other countries or other locales, the point of this article is that things have been changing in ways that maybe we're not aware of if we haven't really been keeping tabs of it. So definitely check that out.
Is it WebKit based, or do you know what it's based on?
No. So interestingly, the first version of this browser was built on J2ME back in 2004. It's since evolved from that, but that's actually one of the things about this browser, sort of a selling point, is that you know, from the very beginning, it had to run on really weak flip phones and stuff, and so it's really optimized for performance, and it's really optimized for poor network, which is probably why it's still so popular, especially in that part of the world. So, you know, you learn something new every day. Libraries, tools, and frameworks. I'm not going to read through all these. These are sort of interesting library updates that have happened in the last month. I'll point out a few things that were interesting. jQuery 3.2, and I say actually 3.21 because there were some critical bugs that they introduced that they had to fix within like 2 days of the release. They added CSS Custom Property support. So if you're not familiar with that, it's really cool, and I'm going to talk about it in the next slide. What's the current version of Angular? Anyone know? No, I mean not counting this, but like the current version we're all using, if we're using it. 2. The next version they just released is 4.0. So I'm not going to go into that, but if you're interested, you can click on the thing that says, huh? So it's basically, it kind of comes down to, there's a lot of fragmentation within Angular of some of the major library components that it supports. And I think the only one that caused a problem was the Angular router, I believe, which like all the other components were on 2.x release track along with Angular itself. Angular router, I believe, was on 3.x. And they were kind of concerned that that was going to be confusing to people based on the way they do that stuff. And then they also made a very public switch to Semver, semantic versioning. And I guess they just decided for various reasons that 4.0 made sense because of all that. And I think the actual description of it is even more confusing than that, but it's 4.0, so there you go. The only other one I'm going to point out here is React XP. How many people have heard of that? React XP. So a few people. It's actually kind of interesting. It's a Microsoft framework. It's built by the Skype team at Microsoft, and they basically leveraged parts of React Native, and they're trying to build an app building framework that is cross-platform. So it's basically building native apps for all the platforms that we care about, including Windows, which I'm sure is their motivating force. So it's kind of interesting. If you're into that kind of stuff, definitely take a look at that one. So sidebar, I mentioned CSS Custom Properties. They were just added. The support for that was added in jQuery. So they're actually really interesting, and they're ready for prime time. So we talk about a lot of features that are browser specific that sometimes are only in Chrome, or they're only behind a feature flag. Well, this one is generally in all the major browsers that we care about. Now, it's probably not in UC browser. I'm not sure about that. Didn't check. But this is basically, you know, we're all familiar probably at some level with SAS and less. Those are called preprocessors, meaning you run your code through something that actually spits out CSS statically, and then the CSS is what you use on the web page. Well, custom properties are actually, it's like SAS, but in the browser, and you can set variables, and you can do calculations that are actually in your client-side CSS, and they actually operate on the fly while your page is executing. So they have these advantages that I'm not going to read, but for certain use cases, it's actually very handy to be able to have it operate that way. So I mentioned ready for prime time. There's an asterisk next to that. If you do have to support IE, it's not going to work, unfortunately. But if you're sort of past that, then it actually works in all the major browsers. So definitely an interesting thing to check out. And React VR. How many people heard that React put out a VR framework? So a few people. So I had a discussion with someone last month about VR. I don't know if he's here tonight. VR is got a lot of momentum right now. So if you're not paying attention, you should definitely kind of, you know, check in on how things are going. A lot of people argue that within the next couple of years, it's going to be the way we do a lot of things. They just released this, and it's basically a way to write React code, literally like angle brackets and JSX, but have it output VR experiences. So pretty interesting. And then finally, this doesn't fit so much with web stuff that we normally talk about, but this is a pretty major thing. How many people use Postgres? It's pretty common. So if you're not familiar, they're about to put out a really super major update to Postgres, and it's going to add all these really cool sounding things that I don't know that much about, so don't ask me about them. but they sound really awesome. If you're a Postgres person, you'll probably be very interested in knowing what's coming. So check that out if you use it. Security. So there's this thing called CAA checking. Well, actually, there's a thing called CAA. So what is that? It's called Certification Authority Authorization. So a CA, or certificate authority, is like when you have SSL in your browser, right? That goes off to VeriSign or whoever, and they validate that that certificate is cool. That's what certificate authorities are, like VeriSign. So there's this new-ish, like within the last 4 years or so, record type. So if you've heard of like A records and CNAME records and DNS, it's a new record type like that called CAA. So what is it? It basically is for the purpose of defining which CAs, one or more, have the authority to actually validate your domain and issue certificates for your domain. And the cool thing is if some other certificate authority that's not whitelisted to do that tries to do that, then you actually get notified that that happened. So cool, but why should I care? Well, it's pretty important. Like hackers, one of the things hackers do when they, kind of own your server is a lot of times they can actually install a certificate from some, source, or like some certificate, some CA that's fake that they came up with or whatever. And basically they can look to other people like they have a green, legitimate SSL certificate when actually it's not, and they're doing bad things. So this is a really simple, trivial way to prevent that from ever happening. Now, the reason this is interesting now is because this has been around for a couple of years, but it hasn't been sort of practically interesting because the CAs haven't had to implement it. Well, just last month, the CA Browser Forum actually made it mandatory. So I think there's a window between now and September, I think is the deadline. So every CA in the world has to implement checking for this. So it's now become not only practical, but incredibly useful to do this. So if you manage DNS for any websites and you use SSL, you should definitely start doing this. In case you missed it, Chrome put out an interesting post, I think on their blog, and they basically hinted very strongly that they may, in an update coming soon, stop supporting JavaScript built-in dialogues like alert, confirm, and prompt that we've all been using since 1990. There's reasons for that, accessibility and other reasons. And they have recommendations for things you can switch to. Interestingly, some of these, like the notification and page visibility API, are actually very well supported across browsers. So if you haven't looked into that, not that anyone here uses alert or anything like that, but this is something to kind of get on your radar, because I think in a day in the not too distant future, Chrome is going to say, okay, can't do alert anymore. Or I think the current plan is to make it actually non-browser modal. So they're going to switch it to where alerts become, I think, tab modal at some point. And then they may or may not even support these other ones. So keep that on your radar. Stack Overflow, we are all familiar with. Was there a comment or question?
I just had a question about the CAA records. So it sounds like a pretty recent thing. You said, I read that like maybe in like December, like the certificate authorities are supposed to support this. But do you have any idea of like the timetable of when like AWS will support these sorts of records? Like what sort of DNS providers out there currently support CAA records?
I think all of them that you would use.
No.
Because this.
AWS doesn't.
Well, I don't know about AWS, but when you go to like Namecheap.com and all those kinds of guys, like,
It's a pretty big like DNS provider.
I can't speak for AWS, so I don't know about that.
It's not about the provider, it's about how you're accessing the registry.
But you need,
So, like-
you need to actually, like, you go into like Route 53 and you put like your A records there. You need to actually have some place you can put the CAA records, or else.
Yeah, and if the registry doesn't support that, then
Yeah. So
yeah,
my question is, which registries currently do support that? Because it seems a lot of major registries don't currently have that feature.
Right, so the question is which registries support it. I don't know is the answer. The standard for that record type has been around at least since 2013. And again, it hasn't been mandatory. So I would guess that's probably the only reason why it maybe isn't fully supported everywhere. But I know I looked at several as I was just putting the slides together that did. So, I mean, if you just Google it, like it literally just pops up. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head. So, you know, again, for me, it was just one slide in amongst a lot of slides. But yeah, definitely go out and follow the link or check it out yourself. And again, between now and December, I'm pretty sure that picture is going to change because it is mandatory. So obviously the record type has to be supported.
GoDaddy doesn't support it either. It's a feature request for that.
So again, I would love to take this offline maybe. Yeah, so I'm sorry you're not happy with that, but you know, I'm not a CA personally, so I don't know what to tell you. Just reading the news, man. So Stack Overflow every year for the past 6 years or so has done a developer survey. They survey 64,000 developers this year. And so if you haven't seen that, definitely go read it. I mean, it like spans the gamut of lots of different things, which languages, which platforms, salary, all kinds of stuff that's really interesting. Just a small taste of it. This is across all respondents what the most popular programming languages are. So JavaScript is at the top, kind of goes down. There's near the bottom, there's some more sort of lighthearted questions. So for example, I'm not going to spoil it yet because I'm going to take a poll on the pronunciation of the .gif file type. So how many people would pronounce that with a hard G, GIF? Maybe half. And how many people GIF with a J? Actually, a few less for GIF. How many people have some other concept for how they would say it? One. So hard G is at 66%, soft G 26%, actually kind of similar to in the room here. But interestingly to me, 2% have some other way. So I would love to know what those other ways are. I don't know what they are, but I kind of thought that was pretty constrained between those two options. Apparently not. So I thought that was interesting. But again, it's a fun thing to learn a lot about the industry, so check that out. Finally, upcoming events. I don't know about every event in Austin. I'm sure there's a lot more. This is one that stuck out to me. So every year for the past few years, there's been an ATX Hack for Change. And I like this because it's a civic hackathon that's kind of around civic engagement. And they basically have project ideas around, you know, fixing transportation, fixing community engagement, stuff like that. So if you're interested in doing a hackathon, but specifically something that has some kind of meaning beyond just playing with, you know, React, this would be a good one to go check out. And that's it for me. So I appreciate your time, and we'll get Chander hooked up here.
Is this supposed to be in English? No one even heard me. Is this supposed to be in English?
Yes, please.
Here's the problem with doing jokes when you're either getting recorded or live streamed, because no one really hears that part. I was just listening to my recorded talk in NDC London, and I'm going, wow. Everyone was laughing, but the way a recording plays, it looks like no one gets my jokes. It's a really bad thing to do. So what I'm going to do is, every time you guys laugh, I'm going to raise my hand, so people looking at the live stream know that people were laughing here, right? So anyways, that's the most important thing of the, so here, this, I love Bleeding Edge, you know. First of all, they're like, hey, come on over. It's Wednesday night. We're going to invite you at 7 p.m. And then Brian is like, hey, I want to get you pizzas. And then we're going to go till about 7:35. And then when everyone's ready to sleep, we're going to get the speaker right up there. And it's like 7:35. I don't even question you guys. I know you're going to be grumpy. I know you're going to show that also. How many of you are here with your managers, first of all? None? Oh, okay, great. Now I know who's the heckler. You know the people who come with their managers, they have to show that they're smart, and they do like 3-4 weeks of reading before the talk starts. So they can ask that one question. That makes them look very smart, you know, so I know who to look for. You're not allowed to ask any questions, sir, with all due respect. This is the most important slide, by the way. We're still at the first slide, huh? The reason is because if you like my talk, tweet about it. If you do not, you know, email me. Here's a lot of good things about me. I tell everyone, 10 years ago, I was so excited about all these things. Oh, one day I want to be an MVP, you know, one day I want to be an insider with the ASP.NET team and all those good things, you know. Let me tell you the truth. If you want to be a billionaire, do not do any of this, okay? These things, no. This is a checklist for what you don't want to do. If you want to be a billionaire, go to school, drop out. That's it. That's all you've got to do, right? Don't pay the entire fee. Go to the school, first day, second day, drop out. Well, if you really want to be a billionaire, drop out in the last semester, because that's what happens. How many of you know about the billionaires who dropped out in the last semesters? Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Larry Ellison, you know, Mark Zuckerberg, even the Snapchat guy. You got to be kidding me, right? He's not technically a billionaire yet. He's valued a billion, whatever. So, yeah, I do work. I'm a CTO for Kasten.com, CEO for ChanderDhall.com. It's not a one-man show. It's a lot of people. Just search us on LinkedIn, you're gonna know. It's like Charles Schwab. No one even questions that. The moment you say Chander Dhall, are you a one-man company? I don't want to go into the details because I'm getting recorded. So half of the presentation is not gonna have good jokes because I'm getting recorded and live streamed. So we're gonna keep it politically correct. So one guy's like, hey, it says you are an internationally acclaimed speaker. Can you prove that? So he sent a message, and after that I couldn't see who it was because it was probably a fake account. I'm like, okay, I speak in Vegas. Isn't that international enough? You do one talk in Vegas and that's all it is, right? I mean, so many people come in internationally to Vegas and they just gamble and other things that stay there. This is, by the way, this is me speaking in London. It's a big room, it's a panoramic picture, so you can't tell. I was like so excited, I'm gonna go speak at NDC London, you know? And I went in January to London. For an Indian guy to go to London in January, you don't know what that is like. It's like a Texan going to New York for New Year. You know what I mean? And then staying in Times Square thinking something amazing is gonna happen. Nothing. That was it. That's the entire room. I had a room full of people. It was awesome. Toronto was so much better. That was San Francisco. This is like a really long room, Microsoft Reactor, amazing facility, completely filled up. I knew. What is it? 7:40? I haven't spoken for 5 minutes yet. Heckling has already started. All right, sir, you're not allowed to comment either, simply because it's a free talk. I'm not getting paid for this. You think you really hired me to do this? Well, get his name. These people don't even realize. You know, I used to be like that when I was 16. I would just piss off people in the room asking questions like that. And then what happens? Next time you go for an interview in a small town like Austin, no one wants to hire you because you're smart, but you're not a team player. It doesn't even matter to me anymore. Because mistakes, you know, you mature, you grow up, things like these happen. That's Germany, by the way. That was London, that was Dallas, and these are the other ones I'm going to do. That's Belgium, that's DevSum, whatever. So this was about 5 minutes to make sure everyone is awake after the pizzas. That's what it takes. So it's a 2-day training that I'm going to try to squeeze in 1 hour because I got to drive back to San Antonio because I'm working with a client there this week. It wasn't scheduled like that. I'll say longer. How about that? I'll give you 5 extra minutes. So Steve Souders, one of the best guys you want to read about performance. The good thing I like about this guy is he keeps updating himself. So if you read his books, make sure you also follow him because there's a lot of things he's already changed. And those things are valid for HTTP 1, and then they change. Another thing, the first 40% of the talk is beginner level, next 30% is intermediate level, and next 30% is advanced level. If there is a guy in this room that says that I did not get into advanced level stuff or I did not learn anything, I'm going to guarantee you $10,000 more than what you're making in your current job if you walk it through my interview, okay? And you pass it. Big statement right there. So, first 70% could be really boring for all advanced people like you. And by the way, I'm getting recorded, so I can't go back on this. All right, so what are we going to do? We're going to try to understand web performance, identify performance bottlenecks, try to make that code faster, and then with time, we're going to go further. How many of you know what's wrong here? None of the, by the way, all the examples I'm showing you are real life examples that I've got for my clients. All I've done is changed it to make sure it sounds very generic and it's nothing proprietary information. It wasn't that hard. Organizers don't get to speak. That'll be cheating, you know what I mean? So what's wrong here? Yes?
Every item needs to be checked in order rather than it being able to doing it kind of like that.
Well, they just want to look for the duplicate. You have a duplicate, it says true, and then you return.
I think we give up.
Really? Okay. Similar example right here, right? So this is, wow, this doesn't work? Oh no, I just did something really wrong. I'm not a hardware guy, by the way. Just to be clear. Okay, so if you look at this example, what they're trying to do is here, I've got is duplicate equals to false, and then I'm gonna go through this list. Let's say this discount list is about 10,000 records. It's possible. Because we are coders and we've seen code like this. Don't tell me you haven't. Now when you go through this list and it says return and you found the duplicate on the 5th line, that's the 5th record. What amazes me is that not most of the people who write this code don't know that you're still gonna go through all the 10,000 records, no matter what. So that particular one returns, but you'll still get the output. It's crazy. So how would you fix this? This is underscore each, by the way. Do you know about the underscore library? No? It's actually one of the most performing libraries out there. This is actually really good code behind the scenes. Performance-wise, it's good code, but they're doing a for each. But there are people who use it wrong. Most of what I get paid for is removing code. I don't really get paid to write code. I'm a performance guy. So here, this is also real life. If not duplicate, there's underscore each, and then there's another underscore each. So what does that mean? Do you know what about order of n squared is? So that's what's happening right here. But now you have an order of n squared. Let's say you had 100 items, and then you have another 100 items. You're going to go to 10,000 loops to find out that you actually went through all of them, even though the 5th record was what it was. You want me to show this in real life? Because I don't want this to be, by the way, the first 40% was supposed to be beginner level. I take that back. Okay, so let's see. You see that?
Make it bigger.
Thanks. So it was supposed to be exiting at 5. We've got a list 1, 2, 3 all the way to 10, supposed to exit on 5. It actually is a return statement. What happened next? It went all the way to 10. So if it was 10,000, it would go all the way to 10,000. Performance, big hit. Very simple. You could have written a very simple for loop and you would be okay with it. But that's not how you want to solve that problem. Most of the times you have a condition and you want to stick with that condition. So this is how you solve the same problem. This is just one way of doing it. You can do it in any kind of way you like. So this is it. Here's a list. List has got an every, and if that particular condition works, great. If not,
Can I see it again? Can't see from back there.
you couldn't.
Nah.
Okay, so you see, now on number 5, I'm out of the loop, right? So when you were saying is duplicate equals to true or false, I would have been out of that loop. So here's the wrong way of doing it, which is your underscore each. And underscore each is awesome if you have to go through all the records. If you have a real reason, do it, and it performs really well. Nothing against underscore, nothing against underscore each. And this is just one way of fixing it. You could have done a simple for loop. Now, code like this was in a project that was rewritten after putting $15 million towards that project. And it was like few years of work. And we did that project in about 10 months, the entire rewrite of that application. But I was surprised to see is code like this in the previous versions. Now, here's another one. This is called Fibonacci slow. And I'll just show you an example of how your algorithm really matters. So if I run this, it's already been running. you'll see that this takes a while to calculate the Fibonacci for just 40. So you know what a Fibonacci sequence is, 1 plus 1, and then you keep continuing, and you keep adding those values. So only for 40, which a human would probably do it faster than that. That was a joke. And the faster way of doing this is an optimized version. Don't worry, I'm gonna get into PowerPoint. It's gonna be fun. Do not even think of leaving the room yet. It gets worse. So that was pretty fast. Now just run this again. The value is whatever that value is, but the function is called 39 times. As you can see, it says the function is called 39 times. If I were to go back and I would do this, you'll see that it takes a while, but the function is called 331160281 times. And that's just simple recursion. Now this particular algorithm, if you run it on Java, .NET, C++, or anything on the server side, it's very fast. You won't even notice the difference, right? And we all solve this the first time in this way, which is if it's n is 1, then returns 1. If n is 0, return 0. Otherwise, just do recursive. That's it. That's all this code is doing. Now this is the slow code. And the optimized version is where you're using a technique called memoizer. Now if you don't follow it today, that's okay. You just go back home, search online memoizer. It's a very common technique. I'm not the one who created this. In this technique, all that's happening is that the moment you have the result for that value, put it in that array and don't go through the extra hoops. That's all that's happening. So it only goes through this recursion 39 times. That's it. Same exact story, nothing different. You still have recursion right here, except that one change that was made. But you saw, for the human eye, we couldn't tell that difference. It was so quick. Whereas on the other one, it was blocked forever. And this is just an algorithmic difference. Makes your life so much easier. Anyone knows what's wrong with this code?
Make it bigger.
It's too small.
Too small.
That is definitely the problem with the code.
That's the problem.
It's meant to be that way. It's meant to be confusing. Let me tell you one secret about questions. Whenever the speaker asks you a question, he wants to take a sip of water. He has no interest in knowing the answer. I am not like that, though. I'm a good guy. I'm really interested to know the answer. So, I mean, the answer's on the screen. So what happens is, this is dynamic code. You're trying to eval. Everyone thinks eval is bad, right? This is my thing. About 5 years ago, till even 5 years ago, I used to think bad things are bad. I was wrong. Ego. That was my developer ego. That made me think bad things are bad. If someone put a blog about something that's bad, I would think it's bad. That's not true. If there is a feature in the language, good or bad, it is going to help you. So can anyone tell me what's wrong about it and how you can use it in the right way? The answer is in the last 2 lines. You want me to run this? So let's just run this for a second.
I think your question is why is it bad though, right?
Yes. These Y's are the problem, you know. You gotta remove this Y. When you're speaking internationally, so many things happen. So for example, you guys, who said what? Do you know what that means? You go to China. Who said what? Who is a man? Said something, right? So sometimes you can't even make regular jokes that you would otherwise make here. So it could be offensive. All right, so let's run this. So that Fibonacci is still going. Don't worry about that. You see, the first one is a window object. The second one is 1, 2, 3. And why is that? Because we did an eval, and we said window equals to 1, 2, 3. So now you have the wrong problem going on because the window object, which is your actual global object in JavaScript, which is the window object, is now 1, 2, 3, right? So now can anyone tell me, why would I use eval? There's a good reason to use eval?
You're reading code from the config file. It needs to be run.
Okay. That's a good point. What's the factor behind it? What's the science behind it? What's the principle behind it? Because eval is bad too, because let's just say that's someone else's code, and he injects something into me, and I allow him to eval, now I'm screwed, right? So what's the principle behind it?
Dynamic code, like code that's made from, that they can change on the fly.
So is dynamic code good or bad? Is eval good or bad? You're gonna read a lot of blog posts about why eval is bad. Eval is not bad. In fact, Gmail uses eval in a very smart manner. I'm gonna show you that in a few minutes. Anyone else can tell me anything wrong about this Angular code? It isn't really Angular code that's bad here, because we've got two kinds of code in here. We got underscore each. We also have Angular code. Yeah.
Well, my problem with it was the fact of using scope parent rather than actually namespacing.
Awesome. Very good. Are you looking?
Oh.
Are you looking for a job?
No.
Okay, good. Stay in touch. That's why I'm asking these questions. Okay, LinkedIn. Like, here's the difference. Right? We pay. We're not like the startups that are gonna talk to you about this, equity that you may make 10 years later or you may not. We actually pay you today. How good is that? Can you believe that? Double the salary of what you make at a startup, surprisingly. But we don't give you free beer, by the way. So we give you so much more money that you can buy beer for the rest of your life. Anyways, so here's another one. Can anyone tell me what's wrong with this code? Now, I don't have a really good way to present it on a slide, so I just put this code. This is continuing. This is one file. How about that? Not bad for one file in JavaScript. We've seen worse. While you figure this out, I'm going to tell you a story. I had a client call me up. He's like, hey, I'm going to fire your guy. I'm like, what's happening? He's like, this guy is ridiculously bad. I'm like, really? What did he do? It's like he writes 3 lines of code an hour. He's been here 3 days, and all he's written is 3 lines of code per hour. I'm like, okay, you can fire him. I'm not going to charge you, but can we have a half-an-hour call? We had the call. You know what it turns out? There were 17,000 lines of code in an Angular controller. He brought it down to 3. Seriously. So anyways, the determiner of good code is not too much code. So can anyone tell me what's wrong here?
Several things.
Let me give you a hint. There's nothing wrong in the first part. Something is really messed up here. Yes.
Actually, there is a problem in the first part.
Okay. There's not something major in the first part. I was just trying to help you guys, and this is what I get. You can't be nice in today's world. I'll still hire you though, don't worry. So what is it? So what's wrong in the first part, by the way?
It's just like if you put in, say, a null value, undefined value, that var string by is going to return, it's going to kick you back an error. You can't call toString on those.
Where's the toString? Okay, good. By the way, if I were to write this code, I would not even write it this way. Because what they're doing wrong, I mean, everything is wrong about this code, right? This is what we fixed, by the way, just so you know, right? This code was written in offshore. And offshore code, I love that code. I love offshore people. They mess it up so bad that you have to invite us to fix it. Anyways, so everything is wrong about this code, and we can go into that forever. For example, is null or undefined. That needs to be one function, one time done in your common library, and you got to call it. They're doing it every single time. Look at that. Is null or white strip. That doesn't belong here, especially not in an Angular module. Let's not get there, right? Let's talk about something really bad in terms of performance. How about we keep it to performance tonight, because just out of respect for the title of the talk. Does anyone see recursion here? 852 milliseconds was the rendering time on this function, and this function was called about 1,600 times over a sales cycle of about 35 minutes. We first of all removed it. It got down to less than 10 milliseconds, plus we made sure it does not get called more than 73 times. Big, huge issue. What is it? It's recursion. Where is it? By the way, it wasn't easy to find because it was part of the 4 million lines of code. I'm just making it very simple by putting it on one slide deck right here. So right there.
Is this empty being called constantly? Yeah.
That's it. And this is going to get called for your entire DOM object, whatever you're sending in. That's crazy. And you know why they're trying to do this in the first place? Even that is not right. Because they don't understand that Angular can deal with a lot of things without you having to do this in the first place. Things that they can natively take care of, you're already doing that. You're doing double the work here. Amazes me. So these are the kind of code, when you remove, you only write 3 lines of code. So do not take any good ideas from here. You don't want to get fired. Anyways, what's wrong here? Not all my examples are Angular, by the way. I just wanted to show some. And then we're going to move on. Couple more slides. I know the ones who are sleepy. It's okay. Doze off. Anyone? It's very similar to the last one. Yeah.
Oh, in terms of performance.
You want all the jobs?
No.
We have like 93 openings right now, and he's already claimed 3. Okay, keep going. What's the answer?
If it's in terms of performance, I didn't catch up. Sorry.
Okay, what's the problem here? What is this method trying to do? You're trying to create an Angular element, and what does span mean? In real English terms, it means nothing. If you have to do nothing on HTML, just put spans, because span really means nothing, right? Now that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make it HTML, and then they're trying to convert it to Angular element. You don't really need that, because their real need isn't that. It's really to take that data and use it, which Angular natively handles. This entire recursiveness to create something in an Angular object, you didn't even need that. Natively handled. Now, what might have happened here is the guy probably didn't know much about it, so it was Angular version 1 or whatever, and he thought that's not how it works. And even though it becomes simpler later, he didn't even look at any of those, right? So there's all sorts of code. When you look at about 4 or 5 million lines of code, you're going to find all sorts of code. You're going to have all top code, and then you're going to have really bad code. But at the end of the day, your app is going to perform as good as the lowest common denominator. Seriously. I'm actually surprised that so many people came in for a performance talk. Usually it's like 5 people. You know, like 100 plus people signed up. I was actually shocked, because no one cares about performance. What's wrong with this code? This should be very simple. It has problems from line number 3, 4, everywhere.
Are they overriding the
Look at this.
That, yeah, so
They've got an invalid and
yeah,
valid on every property at the same time. You see, my life is so much easier when I go to client sites, because I can get so much code. When I'm trying to write a blog, I don't even think that this is going to happen in real life, right? What are you going to do? You're going to set valid and then forget invalid? And what are you going to check? You're going to check for both on every single property? Like, they're like, common sense is not that common. You got to be kidding me, right? I mean, you can't fix stupid, you know what I mean? Like, you want to know, like, our life is so much different. We are like in such a different world here that look at the non-technical people. I'm not even talking about, these are technical people making these mistakes. You know what non-technical people are like? In 2011, there's a BBC reporter who's actually recorded live. He says, Macs don't have, viruses. And Windows, PCs have viruses. He's like, but virus only comes in when you download something. But when was the last time we downloaded something? It's 2011. And a BBC reporter said, when was the last time we downloaded something? I can tell you this, you guys can possibly live without food, but if I tell you not to download for 24 hours, you might die. Like, we are such, pick one, download or food. What are you gonna take?
Download.
When is the day you don't download? You gotta be kidding me. If you have internet, you are always streaming, you're always downloading. This is how our world is. We create things for people that are very smart. So anyways, let's get back to real things, These were just jokes. So JavaScript tips, as you know, that array items and object members are accessed slower than literal variables and local variables. Does anyone know that when you're doing a for each loop and you say length on an object, so let's say you say array.length. In order to make performance better, you're better off caching that into var x equals to or var length equals to object.length, rather than calculating it again and again. Such a small thing, but it does help in the long run. So local variables are faster to access than something like this. So look at location.ref is actually faster than window.location.ref. Quite surprisingly, even though it is the same thing. It is the same thing behind the scenes. So when you have the with is another dynamic execution. So anytime you have execution, you've got this context, and with is dynamic. That means this context is using this particular context, and that's what increases the penalty. And that's why they're like eval's bad. Not only because one reason that you could have security issues, the other reason is that it's also performant. It's not performant, it's less performant because it's dynamic. It changes your execution scope chain. Then of course you have nested object members. That's a bad idea. And then anytime you have inheritance, it's going to slow you down too. So these are a few things that we can remember and move on. But this is what's more important. Look at Amazon. They're saying an extra 1/10 of a second on the response times will cost them 1% in sales. And that's pretty big for a company that doesn't make much money, like, or profit. I know they're valued about $500 billion, you know, but last year was the first year in 20 years they actually incurred a profit, and they're like, hey, we're doing something wrong. We gotta go the other way around. Let's not make profit. That's what the world we live in. You know, Uber lost like $3 billion last year, something like that. But coming from a company like that, I take it seriously. Google, 1/2 second increase in latency caused traffic to drop by 1/5. That's 500 milliseconds. Reduction in latency. Traffic decreased by 1/5. That's more than $10 billion loss of revenue if you were to take traffic equals revenue or correlated to revenue. Performance is way more important than we think what it is. Our top clients, they're trying to achieve response times of 250 milliseconds, but you know what the competitive advantage is. What's the competitive advantage in terms of speed or in terms of response time when it comes to, let's say there's Best Buy and let's say there's Amazon. How fast Amazon has to be compared to Best Buy in terms of average response time on every request to actually beat it completely?
How often does this really come down to front-end stuff?
Huh?
How often does this come down to front-end JavaScript versus back-end database?
It's going to be both. See, we're talking web performance. It's not a JavaScript talk, by the way. Sorry. Did that make you feel bad, right?
It looked a whole lot like
We're going to cover a lot of UI here, but it also has the server components to it. It's actually 250 milliseconds. 250 milliseconds is the competitive advantage time. That's it. Surprisingly. So here's ft.com. They introduced intentional speed delays on their app, and they actually did it for about 4 or 5 weeks, and they realized that this is what's happening. Now their numbers are not very good, but the study is online. It's a good study. You should check it out. So 1 second slower, 2 seconds slower, 3 seconds slower, and in 28 days, that much traffic, that much impact they're having. They're getting percentage drop in article views. In 7 days, that's the 7-day impact. 28 days, that means about 8% people just left, saying, hey, it's taking 3 seconds to load, or 3 seconds slower than we used to take earlier. 8% people just completely left the website. And they did it on purpose to see how this really works. Is performance even important? And then they did some numbers on mobile, tablet, desktop. I encourage you to read it. But more than performance, what's important is perception, because it's all about perception. Now here's certain examples. Let's say 1 second. That's your. There are two different, load times. First second, nothing is loaded. The second, you'll see that there's nothing loaded, but then you can see the header of my website coming in here. And then you have the 3rd second when you see some load, even though this is loaded less. And then you have 4 seconds when everything loads here, but this is completely loaded in 3 seconds. Which one are you going to choose out of the two?
3 seconds.
3 seconds. Are we all on the same page? Is there anyone who's going to choose the last one? 1 second is pretty big. We just talked about 100 millisecond being important, so 1 second is pretty big, right? Are we all with the first one? Are we? Good. That's a lot of people nodding heads. Not most of you are still alive. You're still awake. Pretty big, okay? So then another one where you have the same exact story here. This one has the header come in, this one has nothing come up. And then this again, the whole thing, but this is desktop. That was mobile. Does that make any difference? Now I'm 4 seconds on a desktop versus 3 seconds on a desktop. Would it make a difference? You'll still stick with the first one? Good. Now you're saying, yeah. So people are even more alive and more awake. Wow. This is what, 8 p.m.? 8:05. You're doing good. What about now? So we got mobile, and in this case, they both look very similar for first 2 seconds. The third one, this is completely loaded. Sorry, this one's a little bit more loaded, and then you have 3 seconds, this is loaded, but this one did not get loaded fully, and you have 4 seconds. What are you going to stay with? Still 1?
Second.
Okay, great. What about this one? This or that one? That one had the header.
You're seeing more progress.
It's the same time. You'll still go with that one? The first one? What if it's loaded in 3.2 seconds? Would you go with the first one, or are you going to go with the second one?
The first one.
Still first, even though it's 200 milliseconds slower. Why?
You can see it loading.
Exactly. So now, how does this work? Because this is important to understand. Before that, we're going to talk about 14 rules of web performance. If you've never read it, do read it. There are certain things that are going to change. So I principally agree with most of the things he says, except that book was written way earlier, and a lot of good things have happened after that, right? So, for example, put scripts at the bottom. Good idea, but you want to put your critical scripts at the head, even though I know it's blocking. We're going to talk about that, why. And then, you're going to say style sheets at the top. Great. But then you also have another one, which actually says minify your JavaScript and CSS. Now, I disagree. You want to do that for most of it, except your critical CSS needs to be inline in your head. And there's a reason for it, and we're going to cover all of that. Now, does everyone understand TCP? Because if you do, I'm not going to get into it. Do you understand TCP? All of you do? Great. I'm going to ask you questions now. So, this is the formula, right? So you got RTT, which is really your round trip time. In this case, so latency from San Francisco to New York is about 21 milliseconds, so round trip time is 42, right? And then you have about 90 segments here. We'll talk about that in a second. And then you have a log, and this is more like a rounding off the operators on the side. And then you have a log 2 of n by initial congestion window. So this is a good example of, let's say you have a high bandwidth connection. Why latency is important? Because it doesn't matter what your connection is, right? After 5 megabits per second, the increase, if you double it, let's say you go to 10 megabits per second, it doesn't mean everything is speeding up or doubling up. Your speed doesn't double up. It increases by about 10% only. So when you have something like this on a high bandwidth connection, even though the document is really small, and in this case it's just 128 kilobytes, you will still take 160 milliseconds because of the way TCP works. And even though we know that the round trip time is still 42, right? Because it's actually dependent on that particular formula. So what I don't like about this explanation in general in books is that no one talks about what happens in a bigger scale. So what they do is they'll make 2-3 acts here, and then they'll let you figure it out on your own. So I'm going to give you a little bit more detail here. The way it works is you have SYN that you're going to send, and then you have a SYN ACK, which is synchronized ACK. You get an acknowledgement back, and that's happening in 21 milliseconds, which is basically your latency. Now you really make that real request. Let's assume that request happens on the server for just 50 milliseconds, and that's why we go from 42 milliseconds to 92 milliseconds. Now, the next thing we can do is look at this, and this is the size we're talking about. Let's say it starts with 14600, which is what we talked about, the segments. When that happens, you're going to make a call, and I'm using 10x segments, by the way. You should go and check what kind of TCP is, configuration is on your server, because even till 2013, I think, or 2012, whenever it came out, or 2014, something like that, it used to be 4x. And a lot of people did not really change the configuration. They don't optimize their servers, even though things have happened. Now I'm using 10x. If you use 4x, you would be slower. Now 10x, it goes to 113, and then it comes back here. But the next time I can send 29,200 bytes. I can double it. Does that make sense? I'm doubling it. This is how TCP slow start works. So now I'm going to send that many bytes, and then total is 20x, and then it comes back. I'm going to still double it. Now you notice that I'm going back to 29,200 because I don't have more data left on the server. Right? So what happened? It took me 239 milliseconds to send that much amount of data out because of the way TCP works. It's going to keep doubling, doubling, doubling until the point you've sent your data. But this is the problem with how TCP works. Now this is an HTTP 1 problem. HTTP 2 problem, HTTP 2 fixes a lot of these problems for you. But if you are on HTTP 1, by the way, how many of you are on HTTP 2? You probably don't know. Have you used Gmail? Gmail ran on Speedy, which is really the precursor to HTTP 2. Technically, you've all seen some kind of HTTP 2 in your life already, but maybe on your servers, you probably might not have upgraded. Upgrade is not that hard. All right, so optimizing TCP. How do you optimize TCP? You got to disable the slow start after idle. Because here's what happens. If your web server is idle, it's going to still do the same thing, which it did. as if it's the first ever call. You got to disable that completely. Because once your congestion window size is up, you want to keep it that way, right? So increase your initial congestion window size. By the way, it used to be like, what, 65,000 whatever bytes or whatever. You can take it all the way to a gig or something now. That's it. So it used to be 65,000 bytes. The current limit is 1 gigabyte. A lot of times your websites are slow. You talk to the IT guys, and I'm talking about big corporations. You'll be surprised. IT guys are like, we know our stuff. No, you don't. Most of the times, developers are going to go and tell them, hey, what's your congestion limit? Have you increased it? They don't know their stuff. We have a checklist of 113 items on the server when we optimize your server, because our clients have billions of hits a day sometimes, and they have 20,000 plus transactions a second, and that's not a small number. You know, Bazaar Voice has got about 7,000 transactions a second. It's a big data company. So when you're talking 20,000 transactions a second, it's pretty big. And that doesn't mean that's hits. Those are transactions, and that's way different than hits. All right, so you got to reduce round trip times. And if you look at this, code is only this much. The rest of it is really server-related information. Over here is what you can optimize as a developer. But here's where you need the help. Talk to the IT guys. Hey, you got to make that work. How many of you have websites on mobile that load in about 3 seconds or more? First time load is 3 seconds or more average. You know, most of you are lying. Most of you have that going on. You know why? Because I bet you have 3G customers. And if you have 3G customers, the control plane takes up to 2.5 seconds normally. I'm telling you this because we went to a customer and they had a very good performance going on, and they were like, we're really confused. No matter what we do, we at least have a 4 or 5 second load time. And we looked at it, it was all 3G spectrum. And HSPA network is getting better, so even 3G that was bad earlier is already getting fixed and it's getting better, right? But do not use that as an excuse, because 3G can also connect in 200 milliseconds. You just have to look at what your actual network user is doing. Now, it might not happen in certain countries that are actually advanced, like Japan, South Korea, and others, but it might happen in countries that are a little backward in terms of infrastructure, like United States, China. Okay. We are actually behind. We're 14th, by the way. Have you ever seen that number? We're 14th. The other ones are actually way better than us. On average speeds, by the way, just so you know, right? You'll be surprised that the speeds that I used to get in my hometown in India, which just has a population of 50,000 people, about 10 years ago, is almost the same speed I get with my T-Mobile connection here. So before you think that that country or other countries are third world, you know, you gotta be careful. It's like people like, last time, I did a lot of Indian jokes last time because I'm from India, so I do a lot of jokes about Indians. Some of the Indians are like, why are you like that, man? You just said all the bad things about us. I'm like, yeah, but I also said one good thing about you. And the good thing I told about them was, do you know that the entire country of India, their GDP and their debt, the debt is only 5% of the GDP. In fact, Indians are probably the richest people alive right now. Because if you look at the British, their debt over GDP is 550%. That means if the entire country's GDP is $100, or let's say $100,000, their debt is $550,000. Can you believe that? Ours is more than 100%. It's about 20 trillion. You know, thanks to our politicians. I don't even know when I'm gonna have a roof anymore. That's why you don't want to be a billionaire. That billion, like, what if the dollar has no money, no value left? You're at least happy coding, you know? The billionaires are not even happy anymore. They're always worried. You have billionaire friends? I've got 3. They're not happy people. You don't want to be a billionaire, in fact. And they all owe me money. I'm not making this up. I'm not making this up. I have a friend who has $2 billion, and she got that after divorce. And she's never paid for any lunch meeting we've ever had together, or even a coffee or a tea. I'm just saying. So you guys are in a much better spot, just so you know, okay? So reduce DNS lookups, that's important. Make fewer HTTP calls, that's important. You got to gzip your text. If you haven't done this, that's crazy, because this has been going on for ages. I think the payload reduces about 30 to 40%, and all browsers supported, so you're good to go. People use CDNs, that's a good thing to do. Optimize images per device, it's important. A lot of people do responsive web design, and then they have the same 5 megabyte picture going on that they used to send for the desktop. You know, not a good idea. Easy ways to do it. This is easy, you guys can figure it out. How many of you use local storage for JS and CSS? You know what local storage is? What is it? Are you looking for a job? Kidding.
I'm just a backend developer, so
Yeah?
that's why I came here.
So what's local storage?
Local storage is like when you store it on the browser, like the
Yeah.
browser's memory.
HTML5 feature, all browsers have local storage, right? So you can save, how much is it? It's 55 megabyte plus or something, right? It's pretty good.
Yeah.
So in order to speed up a lot of your applications, one real good idea is to do that. But even a better idea is to store your markup in your local storage. At times you need it, right? There are certain applications, you can take your entire DOM and push it in your local storage. And very few applications it makes sense, but it's better than anything out there. I don't think React, Angular, or others are even using that aspect as much. But think about it, right? What's your biggest problem with the web application? You're getting everything. Why does a native application perform so much faster? Why do we go after single page apps? Because we want to load once, and then we want to use it, right? But what if you loaded once very quickly, and then you also kept loading things that are going to go in your local storage while the user is responsive and doing other things, which you can do in an async fashion. But now that you have that HTML there, you already made it as performant as a native app, because your markup is already there and all you're doing is getting the rest of the data. And it's huge. Do your math on it. 60% of the data is actually markup, the DOM. And then the rest of it is, I'm going to take questions at the end. Because today we have a time constraint. You see what I'm saying? Don't feel bad, I'm sorry. And I've already given you my email, which probably you didn't pay attention to, did you? But if you have my email, you get a free response. People are like, oh my God, I made a mistake. It's simple, it's me@myname.com, not myname.com, chanderdhall.com. All right, so two most energy intensive components are screen and radio. So prefetching data is important. Now, have you ever heard of Pandora? Pandora has a beacon call that basically is like, okay, well, you liked something, right? So when you had the like, they would actually make a call, and it's a very small call because it's really a Boolean that they're sending, and make a request call and say, okay, update it. So we know his likes. But what they realized was just because they're making a lot of these calls, radio was getting hammered 48%, even though the actual data that's going back was less than 1%. So they fixed it, and what they did is they reduced the calls. They kept getting it on your, on the app, but then they made one call to do it. Another example of this would be, let's say you've got a Gmail or something, and you wanted the data to come back, and it's a list, right? And what you'll do is, okay, well, I open it. When I click on it, I'm gonna fetch it. You do that 10 different times, you're killing the radio, and that's the second most expensive thing in your, on your device. So this is specifically to mobile devices. Now what you need to do in that case is really make a call for those 10 records with a little bit more detail, and then if you need a lot more detail, then only make that call. So prefetching data, you might think it's slow, but overall it ends up being better, because if the app experience is not good on the mobile, what are they gonna do? They're gonna start not coming to your app anymore, right? And that, I'm talking about a website too. If you have a website, same story. Mobile website. So HTTP 2 comes with a lot of good things. For example, you can have one connection that does requests and responses at the same time in HTTP 1, right? In this case, that's not the case. HTTP 2 allows you to do that. HTTP 2 has a lot of good features. One of the good ones I like is server push. So if the server thinks that this is more data than a client's congestion window is, which is what you struggle with in a TCP, it can say, okay, I'm gonna send you as much data as I want, right? It's up to the client to accept it. But if you have both sides trusting each other, you could actually send a lot more data in one go. So a lot of the performance optimization techniques that I talked about won't even apply for HTTP 2 because they've already fixed a lot of those problems, right? But it'll still get time to get there before you move everyone over there. Other things will still matter. And then you have stream prioritization. For example, there are 5 resources that I go, well, I want to assign more weight to these, and what I want to do is take these resources and load them first or faster, no matter what you're sending me, I just want those. Well, then you can choose based on the weight of those resources, and then download the dependencies later. So now you got critical rendering path. How many of you know what that is? Okay, good. Only 3, so that's awesome because we can go into more details and bore all 3 of you. All right, so this is really how it works. You've got a network, you've got HTML, then you have JavaScript, and then you have CSS, right? What is blocking? Is HTML blocking? Is CSS blocking? CSS actually is blocking, by the way. I know a lot of you did this. CSS does block. And why does JavaScript block? Because it has the ability to modify HTML and CSS at the same time. So JavaScript is definitely blocking. So this is how it starts rendering. So assume that anything that's strike through is not getting rendered yet. It starts rendering, it goes all the way to NDC Web Performance, and starts rendering the DOM, right? And this is not getting rendered yet. Then it goes to the next line, it gets the CSS, and then it actually has display none, right? So what's happening? There are two trees that are getting built. And what you see in front of you is not the DOM, it's really the render tree. So this is what the DOM looks like, which has a P or a paragraph element that's actually hidden, and then it also has a div that says hello world. And this is your DOM. But what you really care about is what the browser creates, which is your render tree. And your render tree was the one that I showed you earlier. So once you have HTML and CSS, you can actually render something because you don't really need JavaScript. JavaScript only comes in play if you add JavaScript, right? So here's a cross comparison side by side. On the left-hand side is your DOM plus CSS OM, which is your CSS object model. And on the right-hand side is your render tree because we have P that's actually hidden, so there is no paragraph, right? So tips. You want progressive rendering, and we already saw that. We were willing to go to 3.2 milliseconds rather than stay with 3 as long as we can see progressive rendering. Because what happens for the first 2 seconds, no one sees anything on the screen, they think the website's not working, they leave. So we want progressive rendering, right? And then, last point, CSS blocks rendering. Let's talk about this part, which is the JavaScript part. So here's something where you can use async. If you do use async, it's a great thing, which is analytics. So for example, you have Google Analytics. You don't care. You want your app to go, you don't care about Google Analytics. So even if you have it on the top, it doesn't matter, you have it on the head because it's async, so it's going to be downloaded asynchronously, right? And now you have your blocking JavaScript right there. So how does it work? I'll tell you the history of how browsers did it. So this is how they first wrote this thing. They're like, okay, let's get the external script. It gets downloaded, and then what is this time? Can anyone tell me that? This is the download time of script 1. What is this time?
Execution of script 1.
Execution. Parsing and executions is right there, right? You cheated? I'm kidding. And then you have script 2, and then you do the same exact thing, and then you go for CSS and images. Isn't that amazing? That this is how the browser chose to code it this way. And how Steve Sauter says is like they're not like him. The people who code browsers have a family. They go home, they have kids. They're not like Steve. He puts it in a nice way saying they're not smart enough. But Steve went back and said, why are you doing it wrong? You got to do it this way. And later, browsers started doing it this way. So what are they doing now? You got a parallel download, and then you have parse and execute. But you notice? This thing got downloaded first, but it waits till others get downloaded, and then you have execute and parse, right? And here's what's amazing. Everyone tries to fix the download part by minifying and doing all those things and compressing and everything, but no one even cares about this part. But this is important. Would you want to parse any JavaScript that you would not use in your application that often? No, it's a very, very logical question, but surprisingly, no one even talks about this. I'll show you an example where they do it, and that's Gmail Mobile. And you know how they do it? What they do is, for example, you've got this whole entire page that has a list of, let's say, 20, 30 emails whatsoever. And you never hit compose. Let's say you never hit compose, but you still have JavaScript in case you have to hit compose. So what they do is they take this code, which is really the code for composing that particular email, and they take this and push it in your browser commented, just to save the execute and parse time. The first time you hit compose, they actually uncommented and eval it. Now keep in mind, eval's bad. Eval's evil. When? When you don't know whose code it is. But when it's your code, eval's not evil. It's actually really good. So the hit is one time, only if the person uses the feature. Otherwise, their app is so much faster. Isn't that amazing that if you understand how things work, you can get to the bottom of it? And the big reason, I made my first million at the age of 14. I didn't have to get a master's degree. later. Seriously. I went in to see because there were things that I did not understand from the bottom of it, right? I wanted to understand from, not from the servers, but really from literally at the nuts and the bolt level. A lot of people like driving a car, right? And we have tons of developers that can drive that car. But how many of them can actually go in and build that car? How many of them can actually go and build that engine? And that's where the difference is. And that's it, right? If you have this much additional knowledge, you can go to the point that you're so valuable that sky is the limit. The sky is the limit. In software development, it's hard to find good people. Even till today, it's hard to find good people. Most of them are work for us. I can't believe some of you are laughing. Like by now I should have had this much credibility that like, yeah, you're right. No, few are here by the way. Anyway, so JS can block CSS, JS can block the DOM of course. And so use async. Anytime you have document.write, everything is gonna block. So remember that part. This is also important. Defer everything. But critical scripts, you should put as when you need them. Sometimes you might have to put it in the head. How many of you do Angular development? Where do you put it, head or body?
A body.
Body?
And the body.
Have you ever tried to put it in the head?
I kind of split up based on what I'm using. It's kind of the same.
Depends on how you use it. It might not make much difference. Trust me. Try your things on it. Depends on what kind of application. There are some applications put it in the head because it makes perfect sense. I'll give you an example. Let's just assume that I want to do certain things before anything else in my app. And I want to make sure that those things run amazingly well. In that case, I don't care if I have to put my JavaScript in my head. For example, how many of you did jQuery, right? Do you know jQuery? So I'll give you an easy example. Remember document.load or something? What was that? I even forgot. jQuery is dead for me for 5 years now. Document already, very good, you know. So document already, you used to do document already, remember? And if you had jQuery at the bottom, and you did document already at the bottom, what would happen? You would have had to wait for the entire page to load before anything could execute, right? But you gotta look at your user. You gotta see how your website is being used. So for example, let's say you're Amazon.com. I don't care what you're loading. As long as I can go to the search tab and I can type in something, it makes a call back to the server, which is a search server, and I get the results back. Before the even page loaded, I might actually have my query done. So that document.load would not have made any sense whatsoever to go at the bottom of the script tag. That make any sense. I don't want the page to load before that. Does that make sense? And we've done researches with our own clients. In fact, there's a client that we have, and I can't violate my NDA to tell you who it is, but that client has more than 1 million hits a day, every day, period, and then has a lot more hits than that. It runs out of only 2 servers, and they had only less than 2% users using their search. We built it in 3 months, 85% users started using their search tab because of the way it was very fast. And it was less than 55 millisecond response time on the server at the latency. Latency could be anything. Less than 5 milliseconds on the server on peer every single call. In that kind of a situation, you can't do document.load at the bottom, right? Of course, never do document.load. jQuery is dead. Believe me. How many of you have jQuery in your code? Now you're not gonna raise hands, I know.
Oh, my company uses
And then 18 months later, when I'm gonna be consulting in your company, I will find jQuery code there. And it's gonna be 1.9. It has happened. All the crap code comes to consultants, seriously. You know what legacy code means? The code that consultants have to touch. Anyways, so when you look at this tree, the most important part is layout and paint. And layout and paint is what actually takes the most time. So this is how it is. You know what a frame is? 60 frames a second. Can anyone tell me what that means? What does that mean? I know you all talk about all these things. When your non-technical wives are sitting with you, you talk about these things. You throw these words. Tell me the definition now.
how many times the screen renders.
So what does 60 frames a second actually mean in mathematics?
Hertz?
Yeah, that's good. He's just Googling that thing right there with the phone.
No, it wasn't.
He's my friend, I can joke on him. Constantine. I like his hair.
It's a screen
Tried my
refresh.
best, doesn't work for me. Can't get his hair. Ever. Yeah, what is
The
it?
screen refreshes, so.
Yeah, very good. You're getting there, but this is what it is, right? One frame is 16.67 milliseconds. So all you have is 16.67 milliseconds to render a frame. And if you don't do that, what's going to happen? It's going to be thrown out, right? That's not true. technically you gotta give about 6 seconds, 6 milliseconds for the browser. So you really have about 10 milliseconds, that's the truth. So let's see how it works. You got the layout. Layout can do resizing, and it can also trigger a reflow event, which is gonna paint the entire thing again, which is your DOM again, right? How does it work? This is how it works. You have code, then you have garbage collection, then you have layout, and you have paint. Not necessarily in this order. If you kind of do it right, you're gonna see this, but that's not happening in real life. This is what you're gonna see. The same things, code, and then you have the layout, and then you have code, then you have layout, you have code, then you have layout, right? This is what happens. If you do something like this, this will 100% happen, because every time you have this line, you are triggering reflow, which is now doing paint for you. So this is how it works. You apply your style, it creates the bitmap, and then it pixelates the screen, right? So here's a bad example of code that you've seen every single day. What's happening here? Reflow, which is the most expensive operation that's triggering out paint, is being triggered 3 times. So every time you change that border left, border right, the padding, you are painting it again. Can anyone tell me how to fix it?
Use objects.
What is it?
Use objects.
Okay.
That's not it.
Explain more in detail.
Well, it's like saying like, well, the quickest fix is like just do element of style. Yeah.
Good.
And it's like,
He just claimed the 4th job. This is not fair. All right, this is it, right? This is interesting. Like, you would not even think that makes a difference. But this is only one paint operation, and that's it. The previous one was 3. But if you keep doing this over and over again, there's other situations that can happen. So here's another way to look at this. This one, why is this one inefficient? I also have the hint on the screen. Because we're not caching that my element, right? My element.offset, we're not caching it, so it's gonna get triggered again. Here, we cache it and say, okay, let's put it in a var. We do that, no other reflows, and you're good to go. So paint is the most expensive operation of the pixel pipeline, and then changing any property. So this is how it works, right? Unless you're doing a transform, it always is going to trigger a paint. And then when you trigger layout, it automatically triggers paint, right? Which is reflow, same problem. Well, then you can trigger paint without layout by just changing your background, text, colors, and shadows. So you want to see this in real life, by the way? I'll give you a good example of a website you guys probably love. Or maybe before elections you at least loved it. Now it depends on where you are. You might have different opinions. So let's go to CNN.com. So Chrome has some, by the way, how many of you use Chromium? Not Chrome, Chromium. Are you looking for a job? Talk to me. You use Chromium too? Talk to me. It's amazing because every new single good feature actually comes to Chromium way ahead of time, just saying, right? So here's, I actually was making this demo in Chromiums earlier, and now it's made it to Chrome. So if you look at this, anytime you see something red over there, that's what you're looking for, right? So you got reds right here, then you got reds right here, and then you can also come in and make it bigger, and you can understand how this works. That's 8 frames a second. That was red right there. So you know where in your code you're making a mistake. That's it, right? So these are things you go manually. It's going to take you a lot of time. We used to build tools for this all the time, and it's made our life so much easier. And there's a lot of other tools that they're still building, and there's some good work coming. But this tells you that's 8 frames a second. You got to fix it right there, right? Let's go to other ones and see how bad this is. 2 frames a second right there. Can you believe this? And I don't know if this is going to load, but let's try. If it loads today, I'm going to show you more things. So that's profiling right now. You get in the timeline, it profiles, it takes forever. That's CNN loading right now. It's crazy. They have enough money to go fix a lot of these things. Look at that. See what I'm saying? That's our new client. If you know anyone in CNN, do them a favor, have them call us. Right? Okay, that's one. And then here's your paint. So I'm going to show you this. Currently, you see there's nothing green here except the search bar. And I'm going to go and run this. So when I run this, you see this becomes entirely green. What does that mean? Anytime there's a paint operation, that entire region is actually getting, getting repainted again. The bigger your regions, the bigger your problems, just so you know. Now, have you ever seen HTML5 games? You'll notice when you start playing them, I don't even know if the game will play. It's actually on a different mode here. Cut the rope, whatever. You're gonna see, all right, paint flashing, just to make sure it runs. It's Chrome hanging up. It's given up. It's like, okay, great. Why was it hanging up in the first place? Because that operation is too expensive. And then you look at this green. Everything in this page is green. I don't know why in the world Chrome team chose green color for this. Your CIO is gonna come in and like, everything is green. Things are great. It's awesome. This is where you use red, you know? All right, nothing is green here, everything is bad. Green here means bad. You look at the entire page. Now they didn't have to do this, by the way. Even if this is the part that's actually getting done, look at how smartly Google does it. If you go back to this guy, look at this. This is YouTube. Right now you're not running and the paint layout operation gets slower. I mean, it's smaller. The green is smaller here. Pretty big. I can go on forever as long as you guys want to stay here tonight. I don't know how much time I have. Am I done?
2 hours.
I still have hours?
No, you still have a little bit of time.
I do?
We
Wow.
have to be out of here in 20, 25 minutes.
Okay. We'll do it fast. I gotta drive to San Antonio tonight. All right, what else is there? So what causes a reflow, resizing a window, even changing a font, CSS pseudo classes like you have hover or anything similar, even a class attribute, surprisingly, right? And then we talked about offset, width, height, and all those kind of things anyways, or modifying style attribute whatsoever. So how does it work? Not only your all child nodes are repainted, the ancestors of the elements are also repainted. And that's where the bigger problem is. Effectively, you're rendering the entire page. So you got to do these things very carefully. So here's one way you can fix it. We already talked about the other way to fix it. Here's an easy way to fix it. You use fragments, which are document fragments. So you create a document fragment and do everything you want to do, all the operations with it, and then append it to that particular element. So you didn't touch anything, right? After all your operations are done, all you're doing is append it, so it's just going to trigger one time. That paint operation is going to get triggered only one time. Otherwise, you trigger it every single time you play with it. Another way to do the same exact thing is cloning. You clone the entire object, and then do anything you want to do with it, and then go append it, right? So you could do the same thing. So you're cloning the original tree, done. In this case, literally you're taking the entire tree and cloning it. So if you had a div element and it had tons of other elements within it, you clone the entire element. Now this is happening in memory technically, so you didn't really lose, nothing is gonna make any difference to your performance technically because it's all in memory. You're not manipulating the DOM really. You're just doing with an in-memory object. And then this is the coolest one, it's a hack. What you do is if you really don't want to do any of the other two things, what you do is go and display none on that particular tree or the partial tree or whatever that element is. So this div that has 10 other elements in it, you go and say display none. Now it's not part of your render tree. It's still part of your DOM. And do anything you want to do with this, and then go back and say block. And you're back, right? So that works. So this is cool because some of these people are really good. Some of these people, I believe, have slowed down a little bit. So be careful before you take every single word from them. But these people are important. In fact, Steve, is great. Now Paul is, I think he's an evangelist. I don't know if he's a real technical guy, but at least he's an evangelist. So anytime Chrome comes up with newer tools and things like that, Paul's the one who's going to actually talk about it, right? So I would not follow him for technical expertise, but I'll follow him to find out what kind of tooling is coming out, especially in Chrome. If you do Chrome, right? Firefox has some great tooling too. Either ways, Edge has some awesome tooling too. And then, by the way, there was a gentleman who asked the question about IE. Do you know that IE 10 was 4 times faster than Chrome, version of Chrome, on good JavaScript code? It turns out that 85% of the code that's written online is bad JavaScript code, and it's a real number. Yeah, I didn't say that. Douglas Crockford said it, the father of JavaScript. And surprisingly, Chrome optimizes bad JavaScript code, so it appears to be faster. Otherwise, IE 10 and IE 11 were faster than versions of Chrome. So Microsoft knows what they're doing. Of course, they were doing this for the enterprise, and they lost the battle only because they had to stick with versioning and things like that. But some of the smart engineers in Microsoft, you can't beat them even till today. I'm surprised. I'm a guy who did not like Microsoft till they actually went to open source, which is about 8 years ago. And right now they're more open source than anyone else. They're actually the second. I think their ASP.NET platform has the second largest open source contributor any other company has in the entire world. I think the only one that beats them is Google, because of Google and Angular. Even Facebook is behind. So it's very open source. You should check it out, right? Nowadays everything is cool. Things are good. But the books, before you read any other book and you want to read more about the networks, Computer Networks by Tenenbaum is a classic book, updated really well. There's some stuff that you will find in Ilya Grigoryk's book, which is High Performance Browser Networking. I highly recommend reading Computer Networks first. It's a smaller book, and it is the mother book kind of a book. And you want to know all that before you go read that book, because you will find a lot of information, but this is really the book, right? Both books are good, but if you were to pick one, go with Tenenbaum. And then high performance websites, I don't know when it was done, but he has improved on a lot of things that we talked about. But you should get a baseline. If you want to get a baseline, that's where you want to get the baseline from. And then there's high performance JavaScript. Before we leave, this is the example I was talking about. car.images.length. It's just more expensive, so you change it to, oh wait, I didn't do it. Did I do it? Oh, I did it. So here, car.images, even if you put that in var images, is actually cheaper than that one, quite surprisingly. It actually is cheaper. And if you were to go a little bit further, this is really how you gotta do it. Cache the length right here, right? And then do I is less than n right there. Probably the last one. What is this one? Can anyone tell me what that is? Even I'm bored now. I would never listen to myself for 2 hours, seriously. There is no way. I don't even know why people pay this money to come in, you know? You guys are smart. Come to the free ones. What is it? Does anyone know what's going on here?
It's literally true of the entire document for what it was looking for, compared to you're kind of reducing the scope for it and then looking down at the children of that.
Oh, so you saw the star. Okay, good. So this is better than that, even though star in itself is bad. How many of you know how jQuery actually gets to the element? If you have to go find an element using jQuery, does anyone remember $, hash, ID, whatever? Remember that? What if you have to do like a p tag, and then you have a div, and then you have some kind of ID? What would happen in that case? Yeah.
Doesn't it just go down the DOM tree till it finds?
It doesn't. Very good. I wanted you to say it. Because you would think that's how it happens. It actually happens the other way around. It doesn't go left to right. It goes right to left. So the way you think is exactly not how it works, but logically you thought right though. It's interesting, right? It's just amazes me that behind the scenes the algorithm was to right to left. So the way it worked was, for example, you had to go and find the actual ID and you had a p and a div. You would think that it's going for the p and then it's going to go for the div and that's going to go the other way around. No, it's the other way around. It's right to left. It's actually very inefficient. In fact, there's a guy from Elijah Manor who blogged about it and is part of the jQuery team. He's a good friend of mine. And that was the first time I found it. But it was years ago that I was surprised to find it. But counterintuitive to what you think, right? Does anyone know about XPaths? They're actually efficient. If you know what they are, not a problem. Use it. All right, the last one before all of you go home. And I'm going to ask you one good question here, which hasn't been answered in 25 different countries in the entire world and 4 different continents. It's based on this. I know some people are here from my last presentation, including Jeff, Tyler, and all these people probably know the answer. Can anyone tell me why are we doing the last 3 lines here? This is the last question for tonight. You should feel good. You're going to get to go home. Aren't you excited? Like, if we had a life in the first place, why would we be here? Kidding.
Save memory.
Huh?
Save memory.
Garbage collection?
Okay. Yeah, good point. But you know, there's something called delete. You know, there's something called delete remote doc. Why did I not do delete remote doc or delete remote container or delete new para?
Google style guide says that's more efficient.
Why?
I don't know.
You're getting there. Well, are you looking?
It's a function call versus just setting the memory.
Well, I think we're getting back to the same. My record is going to continue. So this is the 26th time, this probably won't be answered. All right, let's see. So, if you've been in my talk, you can't answer this question, by the way. Can anyone know the difference? What's the difference? I know the difference is X and Y, but what's the difference? Someone said global scope. They're both global scope. Yes, you're right. They are actually both global scope because they are part of window object, right? So what's the difference?
Implicit versus explicit.
This is the question you want to ask a guy who comes into your company and says, I'm a UI expert. This is how I humble them. You know, I got like 5 questions, simple ones. And then I'm like, okay, let's talk about your background. What is it? Because if that guy doesn't answer this question, chances are he hasn't done performance improvements ever in his life, right? This is the only question you are not going to answer up here, apparently. This is the question also to figure out how much money I'm going to pay you, right? So, mine too is very simple. I ask 5 questions. Anyone who gets beyond 5 is more than $250 an hour. Guaranteed. I'm going to pay him easily $250 an hour, right? But I know the first one who answers is going to $60,000 to $80,000, right? If you even answered one, which is not 9 out of 10 candidates probably won't answer that one question. He's about 60 to 80. If you answer 2 questions, you're about 80 to 130 K a year, right? You answer 3 questions, you are anywhere between 130 to 210 a year. Seriously. And if you answer 4 or 5, you are way beyond anything Austin startup market is going to pay you. How about that? Okay, what is it?
I think he's wrong about this. Is it implicitly set that to either document or window?
They're both window. They're part of window, right? In a way, they're actually both global, of course, because I can use them anywhere I want to, and I can prove that. We don't have time for that. Just go home and do some work on your own too. I'm kidding. I really love developers. That's why, because regular people don't even understand my jokes. What am I gonna do? Seriously. My fiance is here. She's got a 140 IQ. And you know what that means? That's a genius level. Because no one else could ever understand me. Like, I never had a date. In fact, when I started learning JavaScript, I lost 19 girlfriends in 3 days. Because I was having a crisis. It's not me, it was JavaScript. JavaScript is meant to make a smart person look like an idiot. That was the entire goal of creating that language, nothing else. They sat down one fine morning, they were like, in 1 week, we're going to create a language and we're going to make every smart guy look like an idiot. How do we do that? They succeeded. They're succeeding till today. Can anyone tell me the answers? You can at least guess that. Oh, come on, Fibonacci. All right, so y is not defined, but we get 10, which is x. So you see that? X actually showed up. Y is not defined. So what happened? Well, when people tell you use a var, these are bloggers. They've never coded in life. They don't even know how things work. They're bloggers. They're program writers. They're not developers. You know what I mean? Any bloggers here? Let me hurt your feelings. Because they're not like us. They don't go and code. These bloggers have nothing to do. Seriously. They're program writers. They tell you use a var, but they don't tell you why. They think it's clean. No, it's not clean. Var is good inside a function. But if you use a var, you're making sure no one is going to be able to delete that variable ever. So going back to why I started this conversation, simply because null makes sure that it works in both the cases. It's just a safe thing to do because you would have deleted, but as you can see, you don't get an error when you try to delete. There's no try, catch, throw here or anything that's happening, right? I mean, it doesn't even come in your way, and your unit tests have a good time figuring all this out. And I know how much unit tests you guys do. It's like when you walk into a company like, oh, we're good, our code coverage is amazing. What is it? It's 70%. And we're like, okay, but where's your unit test? Oh, I think that library is missing. Something happened. TFS didn't work, right? So you get the idea? This is the question you want to ask your JavaScript smart folks. By the way, I can't believe that no one left. It's impressive. I'm going to actually bow down to all of you that you didn't leave. This is like, what, 10 minutes, not even 10 minutes to 9 p.m. at night. Thank you so much for being here.
Are you still using Aurelia?
Oh, some of our clients are.
Dude, I love Aurelia.
You are?
I love it.
Angular 2 is out now, though.
Thanks everyone
I hate Angular.
for coming out. Again, if you parked here, grab a ticket. And if anyone's interested, we're going to walk over to Buffalo Billiards. Thanks for coming out. Hope to see you next month. Take it easy. So,
I was just curious to be back. February or very much Aurelio.
Yeah, because I try to contribute as much as I can to the Aurelio meetup. Like,
Yeah.
and I'm always on the GitHub channel. What's his name? Ashley. That guy is not contributing. He's a trainer. He's a trainer, but I mean, like, if I run a question, he's always there. Like, he's definitely will be.
Like, there was an emergency. Should be good till, make sure you get out before the school because they're trying to do a company. Exactly. Your car will. Yeah, no, that happened to Brian once we got back on 12, so. It's Buffalo Billiards. It's on 6th. It's right down. Yeah, just to kind of clean up and take the beer down to Brian's car and everything. But you're welcome to come down and read out with us. Also, I was gonna say you can go down He's actually he did January and February meetup talks because we had unfortunately one guy fell ill and one had to go to Phoenix. So it's pretty tough. How are things going with CM first?
I don't think I can't remember where we're
and trying to keep my organization thing going on track. I've got a new project now. The CA2E and CA Flex products. It's still
yeah, that was my invoice.
I mean, it's not weekend. I'm going back and
Really? Cool. Okay. Well, you guys have always been such a partner as long as I've known, at least as long as I've known you. So that's how
marketing and sales is like over there. It is. I was feeling pretty sick about it because every time I heard the specs, it turned from. No, it's a bigger POC. No, it has to be production level code. No, this is a production project.
well, hey, it's good for business though. I mean, they keep the job there, right? So,
well, the thing is, my budget at the time was expanded, but and I was telling Mark about that. I'll just go do a spring wrestling.
is that what you ended up doing, or?
No. Customer had a service architecture built for them by IBM in 2002. It's not bad. It's not great, but it's not bad. But it shows all the signs of 12 years of mini cooks showing different levels of skill. There's weird things bolted on sideways, but I'm just trying to keep focus on
Just kind of going, right? Yeah, I gotta
I haven't seen anything like I just got you can just do so many basic things just out of it. Not really weird. They have and it came with the charting software. It came with charting software. So you just have like a I work for a startup. The guy was sick. One day.
There's like an Indian dialect. They're asking for a loan $1,000. We think it's yeah. Here's what we think. Here's the results. Yeah. And then the banker is actually able to go.
trying to hire someone. I mean, I can't promise. I'll ask around and see. Because we just can't hire. We can't find anyone with any sort of advantage. But yeah, when we have it, like I said, our website, all legacy. Yeah. 7 years ago, and
Yeah.